Göbekli Tepe, often described as the world's oldest known temple, stands as one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries ever made, fundamentally reshaping humanity's understanding of early civilization, belief systems, and social organization, because it reveals that complex ritual behavior and monumental architecture emerged long before the development of agriculture or permanent settlements, challenging the long-held assumption that religion and large-scale construction were products of settled farming societies rather than their catalysts. Located on a limestone plateau in southeastern Anatolia near modern Şanlıurfa in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe dates back to approximately 9,600–8,200 BCE, placing it at the very beginning of the Neolithic era, a time when humans were still predominantly hunter-gatherers. Yet here they erected massive stone enclosures composed of towering T-shaped pillars, some reaching over 5 meters in height and weighing several tons. Carved with remarkable precision and adorned with intricate reliefs depicting animals such as lions, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, spiders, and scorpions, as well as abstract symbols whose meanings remain deeply enigmatic, suggesting a sophisticated symbolic language and cosmology that predates writing by millennia. The site was first identified in the 1960s during a survey by Istanbul University and the University of Chicago, but it was misinterpreted as a medieval cemetery and largely ignored until 1994, when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt recognized its true significance, initiating systematic excavations that would reveal a series of circular and oval stone enclosures arranged across the mound, each containing a ring of T-shaped pillars surrounding two larger central pillars, which appear to represent anthropomorphic beings due to carved arms, hands, belts, and loincloths, implying that these stones may symbolize powerful deities, ancestral spirits, or mythic beings central to the belief system of the builders. What makes Göbekli Tepe particularly revolutionary is the absence of domestic architecture, hearths, or clear evidence of everyday habitation, indicating that it was not a village or settlement, but rather a ritual center to which people traveled periodically, possibly from great distances, to participate in communal ceremonies, feasts, and rites that reinforced shared beliefs and social bonds among dispersed groups, thereby suggesting that organized religion may have been a driving force behind social cooperation and the eventual transition to agriculture, rather than a consequence of it. The construction techniques employed at Göbekli Tepe further underscore the advanced capabilities of its builders, who quarried limestone blocks using stone tools, transported them across the plateau, and erected them with remarkable precision without the aid of metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or domesticated draft animals, requiring extensive planning, coordinated labor, and leadership, which implies the existence of complex social structures among supposedly primitive hunter-gatherers. The animal imagery carved into the pillars is especially significant, as it appears to reflect a symbolic universe in which wild creatures held powerful mythological or totemic roles, possibly representing clans, spiritual guardians, cosmic forces, or narratives related to life, death, and the afterlife, while the frequent depiction of dangerous animals such as snakes and predators may point to themes of transformation, protection, or the liminal boundary between the human and the supernatural, reinforcing the idea that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a sacred landscape rather than a utilitarian space. Another striking aspect of the site is the intentional burial of the enclosures, as each monumental circle was carefully filled with rubble, broken tools, and animal bones after a period of use, only for a new enclosure to be constructed nearby, suggesting a deliberate ritual of closure and renewal rather than abandonment due to decline or disaster, which implies a cyclical worldview and a deep respect for tradition and sacred continuity. This practice also preserved the structures remarkably well, allowing modern archaeologists to uncover them in a state of preservation unparalleled for sites of such antiquity. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest phase of Göbekli Tepe well before the widespread domestication of plants and animals in the region, yet evidence from nearby sites suggests that agriculture began to develop shortly afterward, leading some scholars to propose that the social demands of constructing and maintaining ritual centers like Göbekli Tepe may have encouraged more reliable food production, thereby accelerating the domestication of wheat and other crops in the Fertile Crescent. If this interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe represents not merely the earliest temple, but a pivotal catalyst in the transformation of human society, marking the point at which shared beliefs and communal identity reshaped humanity's relationship with the environment. The absence of written records means that interpretations of Göbekli Tepe remain speculative, yet its sheer scale and symbolic richness make it clear that the people who built it possessed a profound understanding of their world and their place within it, guided by myths, rituals, and cosmological concepts that were powerful enough to mobilize large groups and sustain long-term collective projects. Over time, Göbekli Tepe has become a focal point in debates about the origins of religion, civilization, and consciousness, forcing scholars to reconsider linear models of progress and acknowledge that human creativity, spirituality, and social complexity emerged in multiple forms long before cities, states, and empires. Today, Göbekli Tepe is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and continues to be only partially excavated, with geophysical surveys indicating that many more enclosures lie buried beneath the mound, promising future discoveries that may further transform our understanding of early humanity. As research continues, Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent yet eloquent testament to the deep antiquity of human belief, reminding us that the impulse to seek meaning, connect with the sacred, and express shared identity through monumental art and architecture is not a late development in human history, but one of its most ancient and defining characteristics, rooted in a time when humanity was just beginning to reshape the world and itself through imagination, cooperation, and ritual. Building upon the revelations of its earliest discovery, Göbekli Tepe's deeper layers and broader context further illuminate how this extraordinary ritual complex fits into the spiritual, social, and cognitive evolution of early humanity. Because when examined alongside neighboring pre-pottery Neolithic sites, it becomes evident that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated anomaly, but the ceremonial heart of a wider cultural horizon that spanned southeastern Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia, a region where human groups were experimenting with new ways of organizing life, belief, and cooperation long before the rise of permanent villages. Archaeological comparisons with sites such as Nevali Sari, Karahan Tepe, and Sayernu reveal shared architectural motifs, symbolic elements, and stoneworking traditions, suggesting a network of communities bound together by common rituals and mythological frameworks, with Göbekli Tepe occupying a central, perhaps supreme, position within this sacred landscape, functioning as a pilgrimage center where dispersed groups gathered to reaffirm collective identity, transmit cosmological knowledge, and perform ceremonies that transcended individual clans or territories. The T-shaped pillars, so distinctive of Göbekli Tepe, are now understood not merely as architectural supports, but as symbolic beings, their human-like form reinforced by carved arms and hands that wrap around the sides, indicating an intentional representation of personhood, while the absence of facial features suggests that these figures were not portraits of individuals, but embodiments of abstract forces, ancestors, or divine entities whose power lay beyond the human realm. This abstraction hints at a sophisticated theological concept in which the sacred was understood as omnipresent yet ineffable, a notion that resonates strongly with later religious traditions despite the immense temporal gap. The animal reliefs, when viewed collectively across multiple enclosures, appear to form a symbolic system rather than random decoration, with certain species recurring in specific contexts, possibly reflecting mythic narratives, seasonal cycles, or cosmological zones, such as the underworld, the earthly plane, and the sky, a theory supported by the prominence of vultures, which in later Neolithic iconography are associated with death rituals and the transformation of the soul, implying that Göbekli Tepe may have been deeply connected to mortuary practices and beliefs about the afterlife, even though no human burials have been conclusively identified within the enclosures themselves. This absence may indicate that the site was reserved for the realm of the spirits rather than the dead, a liminal space where the living interacted symbolically with forces governing life, death, and renewal. The organization of labor required to construct Göbekli Tepe further challenges simplistic notions of hunter-gatherer societies as small, egalitarian bands with limited capacity for large-scale projects. Because the quarrying, carving, transport, and erection of the pillars would have demanded sustained cooperation among dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals, as well as specialized knowledge in stoneworking, spatial planning, and ritual design, pointing to the emergence of social differentiation based on skill, ritual authority, or leadership, rather than economic surplus alone. Feasting likely played a crucial role in sustaining this cooperation, as evidenced by large quantities of animal bones found at the site, suggesting communal consumption events that reinforced social bonds and rewarded participation in construction and ritual activities, while also serving as performative expressions of abundance and generosity in a world still dominated by uncertainty and environmental risk. Environmental studies of the region during the period of Göbekli Tepe's use indicate a relatively rich landscape of grasslands, wild cereals, and abundant game, conditions that may have enabled seasonal gatherings of large groups without immediate reliance on agriculture. Yet the very success of these gatherings may have created pressures that ultimately encouraged the domestication of plants, particularly einkorn wheat, which genetic evidence traces to the nearby Karakadeg Mountains, reinforcing the idea that ritual and belief were active agents in shaping economic transformation rather than passive reflections of it. The intentional backfilling of the enclosures remains one of the most intriguing aspects of Göbekli Tepe, because the care with which these monumental structures were buried suggests a deliberate act imbued with symbolic meaning, possibly marking the end of a ritual cycle, the death of a symbolic order, or the need to ritually seal powerful spaces before constructing new ones, a practice that echoes later traditions of temple renewal and sacred closure found across many cultures, indicating a deep-rooted human impulse to manage the power of sacred spaces through structured rites. As excavation has progressed, it has become clear that only a small fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered, with geophysical surveys revealing dozens of additional stone circles beneath the surface, implying that the site's ritual significance endured for centuries and that its builders repeatedly returned to the same hilltop, investing immense labor into a place that held profound cosmological importance, possibly perceived as a world axis or a point of connection between realms. The cognitive implications of Göbekli Tepe are equally profound, as the planning and symbolic coherence evident in its architecture suggest advanced abstract thinking, long-term memory, and the ability to transmit complex ideas across generations without writing, relying instead on oral tradition, ritual performance, and visual symbolism carved into stone, which functioned as enduring mnemonic devices anchoring collective knowledge in the landscape itself. This challenges outdated evolutionary models that place symbolic thought and religion as late developments, instead supporting the view that the roots of myth, ritual, and shared meaning stretch deep into humanity's past and were integral to survival and adaptation. Modern debates surrounding Göbekli Tepe often extend beyond archaeology into philosophy and anthropology, raising questions about the origins of inequality, authority, and organized religion. Because while the site demonstrates remarkable cooperation, it also implies some form of ritual hierarchy or leadership, capable of coordinating labor and maintaining sacred knowledge, suggesting that power structures may have emerged initially through control of meaning and ritual rather than material resources. Yet there is little evidence of coercion or permanent dominance, pointing instead to a fluid social system in which participation in the sacred conferred status and influence without rigid institutionalization. Today, Göbekli Tepe continues to captivate scholars and the public alike, not because it offers definitive answers, but because it opens a window onto a formative moment in human history when belief, creativity, and cooperation converged to produce something unprecedented, a a monumental expression of the human search for meaning that predates cities, writing, and kings by thousands of years. As ongoing research refines dating, deciphers iconography, and situates Göbekli Tepe within broader regional networks, it becomes increasingly clear that this site represents not an isolated miracle, but a turning point in the human story, a place where imagination shaped reality, and where the sacred became a driving force in humanity's long journey toward complex societies, reminding us that at the dawn of civilization, it was not hunger alone that brought people together, but shared visions of the unseen, carved forever into stone. As scholarship on Göbekli Tepe continues to evolve, Part 3 of its story delves deeper into the broader implications this ancient sanctuary holds for understanding human spirituality, memory, and the long-term transformation of belief into civilization. Because Göbekli Tepe does not merely represent an early temple, but a profound shift in how humans perceived time, space, and their collective destiny. Marking a moment when ritual landscapes became anchors of cultural continuity across generations. The repeated construction, use, and burial of monumental enclosures over centuries indicate that the hill itself was imbued with sacred permanence, a place remembered, revisited, and revered long after the original builders had passed, suggesting that early humans possessed a strong sense of ancestral connection and historical consciousness, even in the absence of writing, calendars, or formal chronologies. This continuity implies that oral traditions surrounding Göbekli Tepe were extraordinarily resilient, capable of transmitting complex cosmological narratives, construction knowledge, and ritual protocols across many lifetimes, reinforcing the idea that memory and myth functioned as social technologies that bound communities together and preserved identity in a world of constant environmental and social change. The spatial organization of the enclosures further supports this interpretation, as their careful orientation, symmetry, and standardized design point to shared cosmological principles that governed how sacred space should be structured, possibly reflecting beliefs about cardinal directions, celestial movements, or metaphysical order. Even though definitive astronomical alignments remain debated, the intentionality behind the architecture is unmistakable, revealing a worldview in which harmony between the human, natural, and supernatural realms was materially expressed through stone. The central pillars, towering above their surroundings, may have served as cosmic mediators, symbolizing the axis between earth and sky, life and death, chaos and order, a concept echoed in later mythologies across the world, from world trees to sacred mountains, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe represents one of the earliest physical manifestations of a universal human impulse to locate meaning at a symbolic center of existence. The artistic style of the carvings, combining realism with abstraction, further demonstrates a sophisticated cognitive balance between observation of the natural world and symbolic transformation, as animals are rendered with anatomical accuracy, yet placed within compositions that strip them of mundane context, elevating them into mythic entities whose presence communicated power, danger, protection, or transformation, rather than simple ecological familiarity. This artistic choice reinforces the interpretation of Göbekli Tepe as a ritual narrative space, where stone reliefs functioned as visual myths, encoding stories that were likely activated through ceremonial performance, song, and movement, turning the enclosures into immersive theaters of belief rather than static monuments. The absence of domestic debris, combined with evidence of large-scale feasting, suggests that participation in Göbekli Tepe's rituals was episodic yet intense, possibly aligned with seasonal cycles, astronomical events, or key moments in the social calendar, such as initiations, alliances, or collective mourning, transforming the site into a temporal as well as spatial focal point where time itself was ritually structured and experienced as sacred recurrence rather than linear progression. Such practices may have played a crucial role in stabilizing social relationships among increasingly large and interconnected groups, providing shared reference points that reduced conflict, reinforced norms, and facilitated cooperation across wide territories. thereby laying the psychological and cultural groundwork for more permanent forms of social organization. From this perspective, Göbekli Tepe can be seen as a prototype of later religious institutions, not in terms of doctrine or hierarchy, but in its capacity to generate collective meaning, regulate behavior through shared symbols, and mobilize resources for communal projects, illustrating that religion's power as a social force predates economic surplus and political authority. The eventual decline and abandonment of Göbekli Tepe around 8200 BCE coincides with significant changes in subsistence strategies, as agriculture and animal domestication became increasingly central to life in the region, suggesting that as daily existence grew more anchored to permanent settlements and cultivated fields, the need for a distant, monumental ritual center may have diminished or transformed, with sacred practices becoming more localized, integrated into village life, and expressed through smaller-scale architecture. Yet the deliberate and respectful burial of the site indicates not rejection but closure, as if the builders consciously ended a sacred chapter while preserving its memory beneath the earth, an act that resonates with later traditions of ritual retirement and sacred preservation, underscoring the enduring importance of managing transitions within belief systems. The rediscovery of Göbekli Tepe in the modern era has itself become part of the site's story, forcing contemporary societies to confront assumptions about progress, rationality, and the origins of culture, because it reveals that symbolic thought, artistic expression, and organized spirituality were not byproducts of civilization but foundational forces that shaped its emergence, compelling archaeologists, anthropologists, and philosophers alike to rethink linear narratives that place material necessity above imagination and belief. Göbekli Tepe reminds us that humans are meaning-making beings first and foremost, driven not only by survival, but by the need to situate existence within a larger cosmic framework, a need powerful enough to inspire monumental creation, even in the absence of agriculture, cities, or states. As excavation continues, and new sites related to Göbekli Tepe come to light across the region, a picture is emerging of a deeply interconnected ritual world at the dawn of the Neolithic, one in which sacred landscapes, symbolic art, and communal ceremonies played central roles in shaping identity and guiding transformation, positioning Göbekli Tepe not as an isolated wonder, but as the most visible expression of a broader spiritual revolution that quietly reshaped humanity's path. Ultimately, Göbekli Tepe stands as a timeless testament to the depth of early human consciousness, a reminder carved in stone that long before written history began, humans gathered to imagine, to worship, to remember, and to build together, laying the invisible foundations upon which all later civilizations would rise. And in doing so, it continues to speak across 12,000 years, challenging modern humanity to recognize that the roots of civilization lie not only in tools and fields, but in shared dreams, sacred stories, and the enduring human quest for meaning. Part 4 of the Göbekli Tepe series moves beyond the internal world of the sanctuary itself and explores how this ancient site reshapes our understanding of human origins on a global scale. Because Göbekli Tepe forces a fundamental reevaluation of the pathways through which complex societies emerged, demonstrating that shared belief, symbolic imagination, and ritual cooperation were not secondary developments following agriculture and settlement, but primary forces that actively reorganized human life, long before fields were plowed or villages permanently established. When viewed in this broader evolutionary context, Göbekli Tepe appears as a cultural threshold, a moment when humanity crossed from purely adaptive existence into consciously constructed meaning systems that reshaped landscapes, identities, and intergroup relationships, revealing that the earliest monumental architecture was not built to house rulers, store surplus, or defend territory, but to materialize the invisible worlds of myth, cosmology, and spiritual authority. This realization has profound implications for how archaeologists interpret other early sites around the world, encouraging renewed scrutiny of structures once dismissed as simple or utilitarian, and opening the possibility that many prehistoric landscapes encoded ritual significance that has yet to be fully recognized. The symbolic grammar visible at Göbekli Tepe, expressed through recurring animal motifs, abstract signs, and standardized architectural forms, suggests the existence of a shared ideological language that could transcend individual communities, enabling cooperation across wide regions without centralized political institutions. And this capacity for large-scale coordination based on belief rather than coercion may represent one of the most important innovations in human history. Because it allowed dispersed groups to act collectively, share resources, and resolve tensions through ritualized frameworks rather than constant conflict. The influence of Göbekli Tepe's ritual model can be tentatively traced forward in time through later Neolithic and Chalcolithic traditions, where communal buildings, symbolic art, and ceremonial feasting continue to play central roles, indicating that the social technologies pioneered at Göbekli Tepe did not vanish with its burial, but were transformed and adapted as societies became more sedentary and economically complex. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe represents an ancestral blueprint for later temples, sanctuaries, and sacred centers, not because it directly inspired specific architectural forms, but because it established the principle that shared sacred spaces could anchor social order, transmit values, and legitimize authority through symbolic means. The cognitive demands involved in sustaining such a system were immense, requiring not only technical skills, but the ability to conceptualize abstract entities, negotiate shared meanings, and maintain long-term commitments to places and traditions that extended beyond individual lifespans, pointing to a level of psychological complexity that challenges simplistic distinctions between prehistoric and civilized minds. From a philosophical perspective, Göbekli Tepe invites reflection on the nature of progress itself, because it reveals that humanity's earliest large-scale achievements were not driven by material efficiency or technological necessity alone, but by existential questions about life, death, and the unseen forces shaping reality, suggesting that spirituality and creativity are not luxuries of surplus societies, but core aspects of human nature that can motivate extraordinary collective action even under conditions of relative material simplicity. This insight resonates powerfully in the modern world, where technological advancement often outpaces shared meaning, reminding us that social cohesion depends not only on economic systems and political institutions, but on narratives and symbols that provide a sense of belonging and purpose. The eventual concealment of Göbekli Tepe beneath layers of earth can be seen as both an ending and a legacy, because while the site ceased to function as an active ritual center, the ideas it embodied, collective identity, sacred space, and symbolic order, continued to evolve, embedded within new forms of social organization as humans transitioned fully into agricultural life, village-based communities, and eventually urban civilizations. In this light, Göbekli Tepe stands at the root of a long continuum rather than outside history, linking the world of mobile hunter-gatherers to the complex religious and cultural systems that would later define civilizations across Mesopotamia, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Modern scientific engagement with Göbekli Tepe has also transformed public understanding of prehistory, capturing global imagination and demonstrating how a single archaeological discovery can overturn entrenched theories, encourage interdisciplinary collaboration, and inspire new questions about humanity's shared past. As advances in dating techniques, digital mapping, and comparative analysis continue to refine interpretations while leaving room for mystery and debate. Importantly, Göbekli Tepe also raises ethical questions about preservation, interpretation, and cultural heritage, as the responsibility to protect such an irreplaceable site must be balanced against the desire for excavation and tourism, reminding us that the way modern societies treat ancient sacred places reflects contemporary values just as much as ancient ones. As a World Heritage Site, Göbekli Tepe now functions as a bridge between past and present, offering not only scientific insight, but a space for reflection on what it means to be human, why we build monuments, and how shared beliefs can shape destinies across millennia. Ultimately, Part 4 affirms that Göbekli Tepe is not merely the world's oldest known temple, but a mirror held up to humanity's deepest impulses, revealing that long before written history, humans gathered to transform fear into meaning, isolation into community, and imagination into enduring stone. And in doing so, they set humanity on a path where belief and cooperation would forever intertwine, shaping the course of civilization from its very beginnings. Part 5 of the Göbekli Tepe series turns inward toward the human experience behind the stones, seeking to understand what participation in this ancient sanctuary may have meant for the individuals and communities who gathered there. Because beyond architecture, symbolism, and theory lies the lived reality of people whose emotions, fears, hopes, and collective imagination gave Göbekli Tepe its true power. Transforming a barren limestone hill into a sacred center that reshaped human consciousness. To approach Göbekli Tepe from this perspective is to imagine a world without writing, metal, or cities, yet rich in oral tradition, sensory ritual, and deep attentiveness to nature, where meaning was not stored in texts, but enacted through movement, sound, repetition, and monumental form, and where knowledge lived in bodies as much as in memory. The journey to Göbekli Tepe itself may have been a ritual act, with groups traveling seasonally across familiar landscapes, following paths shaped by tradition and story, converging on the hilltop not merely for practical purposes, but to enter a different mode of being, one marked by heightened awareness and collective participation, suggesting that the boundary between sacred and ordinary life was negotiated through physical movement and shared intention. Upon arrival, participants would have encountered a space unlike any other in their world, defined by towering pillars rising from circular enclosures, their surfaces alive with carved animals that seemed to emerge from the stone itself, creating an atmosphere charged with presence and power, where the natural and supernatural appeared to intersect, and where the scale of construction alone would have inspired awe, reinforcing the authority of the rituals performed there. Sound may have played a crucial role in shaping this experience, as chanting, drumming, and spoken myth would have echoed within the stone circles, amplified by their curved walls, turning ritual into an immersive sensory event that bound individuals into a single rhythmic body, dissolving personal identity into collective consciousness and reinforcing shared belief through embodied participation. Firelight flickering across carved reliefs during night ceremonies could have animated the animal figures, making them appear to move and breathe, blurring the boundary between representation and reality, and deepening the sense that the spirits embodied in stone were active participants in the ritual, watching, judging, or guiding the living. Feasting, too, would have been a powerful experiential element, not merely as sustenance, but as ritualized abundance, where the communal consumption of hunted animals affirmed social bonds, honored the forces believed to govern success and survival, and transformed food into a medium of symbolic exchange between humans and the sacred realm. Such gatherings may have served as key moments of social renewal, where disputes were resolved, alliances reaffirmed, and shared narratives reinforced, allowing dispersed groups to maintain cohesion across time and space without permanent political structures. The role of ritual specialists at Göbekli Tepe, while archaeologically elusive, can be inferred from the complexity and consistency of the site's symbolism, suggesting that certain individuals possessed deep knowledge of myth, ceremony, and sacred protocols, acting as custodians of tradition and mediators between the human and supernatural worlds. Yet their authority likely rested not on coercion, but on charisma, knowledge, and the ability to evoke collective emotion, reflecting a form of leadership rooted in meaning rather than force. Participation in Göbekli Tepe's rituals may have marked significant life transitions, such as initiation into adulthood, mourning the dead, or affirming group identity, embedding personal biographies within a larger cosmological framework that gave suffering, loss, and uncertainty a sense of purpose and continuity. From this experiential standpoint, Göbekli Tepe can be understood as a technology of transformation, a place designed to alter perception, strengthen belief, and reshape social relationships through carefully orchestrated sensory and symbolic environments, anticipating later religious architecture in its ability to guide emotion and thought without reliance on written doctrine. The psychological impact of such experiences should not be underestimated, because repeated exposure to awe-inspiring ritual spaces can profoundly shape values, reinforce norms, and cultivate a shared moral universe, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe played a key role in stabilizing increasingly complex social networks at a time when human groups were expanding in size and interaction. This stabilization may have been essential for managing the tensions and uncertainties of a changing world, as climatic shifts and population growth placed new pressures on traditional lifeways, making shared belief systems not only spiritually meaningful but socially necessary. The eventual transition toward agriculture and sedentism did not erase the experiential legacy of Göbekli Tepe, but likely internalized and redistributed it, as rituals became embedded within daily life and smaller-scale sacred spaces, carrying forward the emotional and symbolic patterns forged on the hilltop into new social contexts. Even after its deliberate burial, Göbekli Tepe may have continued to exist in memory and myth, its stories retold as ancestral origins or sacred precedents, shaping how later communities understood their relationship to the land, the spirits, and each other. The modern encounter with Göbekli Tepe mirrors this transformative potential in unexpected ways, as contemporary visitors and scholars often describe a sense of wonder and disorientation when confronted with the site's antiquity and sophistication, experiencing a rupture in familiar narratives of progress that invites deeper reflection on what it means to be human. This emotional response underscores a continuity between ancient and modern minds, suggesting that the capacity for awe, reverence, and meaning-making remains a constant thread throughout human history, even as its expressions evolve. Part 5 thus emphasizes that Göbekli Tepe is not only an archaeological phenomenon or an intellectual puzzle, but a human story written in stone, one that speaks to universal experiences of gathering, believing, remembering, and transforming together, reminding us that civilization did not begin solely with the cultivation of plants or the construction of houses, but with the shared human impulse to step beyond the ordinary, to create spaces where the visible and invisible converge, and to bind individuals into enduring communities through ritual, imagination, and collective hope, an impulse that continues to shape human societies long after the stones of Göbekli Tepe were laid gently to rest beneath the earth. Part 7 of the Göbekli Tepe series explores the enduring mystery at the heart of this ancient sanctuary, focusing on the unanswered questions, competing interpretations, and the profound sense of uncertainty that continues to surround the site. Because despite decades of excavation and scholarship, Göbekli Tepe resists definitive explanation, standing as a reminder that the deepest roots of human culture are often the hardest to fully recover. One of the most debated issues concerns the precise nature of the rituals performed there, as the monumental enclosures, anthropomorphic pillars, and dense animal symbolism suggest a complex ceremonial system. Yet the absence of written records leaves scholars reliant on material clues and comparative anthropology, leading to multiple interpretations that range from ancestor veneration and shamanistic practices to cosmological worship and initiation rites, each capturing part of the truth while leaving other aspects unresolved. The possibility that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a center for rites of death and transformation remains compelling, particularly given the prominence of vultures and headless human figures in some carvings, motifs that echo later Neolithic mortuary symbolism associated with the exposure of bodies and the symbolic journey of the soul. Yet the lack of human burials within the enclosures complicates this view, suggesting that death may have been ritually acknowledged rather than physically present, reinforcing the idea that Göbekli Tepe occupied a liminal space between worlds rather than serving as a cemetery. Another persistent question involves the social identity of the builders, as the scale and sophistication of the site challenge simplistic models of egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies, prompting debate over whether Göbekli Tepe represents the emergence of early ritual elites, or whether its construction was managed through collective consensus and shared obligation without rigid hierarchy. a distinction that carries significant implications for understanding the origins of power and inequality in human history. The standardized architectural forms and symbolic coherence across multiple enclosures imply strong cultural norms and ritual discipline, yet the absence of fortifications, weapons, or overt signs of coercion suggests that participation was voluntary and motivated by belief, social prestige, and shared identity rather than force, pointing to a form of organization that does not fit neatly into later categories of chiefdoms or states. Astronomical interpretations add another layer of mystery, as some researchers have proposed alignments between the enclosures and celestial events or constellations, arguing that Göbekli Tepe encoded a sky-based cosmology linking earthly ritual to cosmic order, while others caution that such interpretations risk imposing later astronomical knowledge onto earlier societies, highlighting the tension between imaginative reconstruction and empirical restraint that characterizes much of the debate surrounding the site. Similarly, interpretations of the abstract symbols carved into the pillars remain highly contested, with suggestions ranging from clan markers and mythic narratives to proto-writing systems or symbolic calendars, none of which can be conclusively proven, underscoring the limits of archaeological inference when dealing with symbolic systems separated from us by 12 millennia. The intentional burial of the enclosures continues to provoke speculation, as scholars seek to understand why a society would invest immense labor into constructing monumental ritual spaces only to deliberately fill them in, an act that appears wasteful by modern standards, but likely carried deep symbolic significance, perhaps representing the completion of ritual cycles, the containment of sacred power, or the transition to new modes of life as agriculture reshaped social priorities. This practice challenges modern assumptions about permanence and progress, suggesting instead a worldview in which renewal required closure, and where meaning was preserved not through continuous use, but through ritualized endings that honored the past while making space for transformation. The mystery of Göbekli Tepe is further intensified by what remains hidden, as geophysical surveys indicate that the majority of the site is still buried, leaving open the possibility that future discoveries could dramatically alter current interpretations, revealing new architectural forms, symbolic motifs, or evidence of activities that have so far eluded detection. This incompleteness serves as a humbling reminder that our understanding of prehistory is always provisional, shaped by what has been uncovered as much as by what remains unseen. Beyond specific debates, Göbekli Tepe raises broader epistemological questions about how modern societies interpret the distant past, because our frameworks of analysis, economic, political, scientific, may be ill-suited to fully grasp a world where meaning, ritual, and cosmology were inseparable from daily life, inviting reflection on the limitations of contemporary categories when applied to deep time. The fascination with Göbekli Tepe also reflects a modern desire to locate origins, to find a single point where religion, civilization, or consciousness began. Yet the site ultimately resists such reduction, pointing instead to a gradual and collective emergence of complexity rooted in shared human capacities rather than sudden breakthroughs. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe is less an answer than a question carved in stone, challenging us to rethink linear narratives of human development and to acknowledge that the past was as intellectually rich and emotionally complex as the present, even if its expressions differ radically from our own. The enduring power of Göbekli Tepe lies precisely in this ambiguity, because it invites continual reinterpretation and dialogue across disciplines, cultures, and generations, ensuring that it remains a living site of inquiry rather than a closed chapter of history. Part 7 thus embraces uncertainty not as a failure of knowledge, but as an essential dimension of understanding, recognizing that mystery itself may have been central to the site's original function, cultivating awe, reverence, and openness to the unknown among those who gathered there. By confronting us with unanswered questions about belief, cooperation, and meaning at the dawn of civilization, Göbekli Tepe continues to fulfill a role strikingly similar to that which it may have played 12,000 years ago, drawing humans together around shared wonder and reminding us that the search for understanding, like the stones themselves, is an enduring and deeply human endeavor. Part 8 of the Göbekli Tepe series turns toward synthesis, drawing together archaeology, anthropology, psychology, and philosophy to explore what this ancient sanctuary ultimately reveals about the human condition. Because by this stage it becomes clear that Göbekli Tepe is not merely a site to be analyzed, but a lens through which humanity can better understand itself, its origins, and its enduring patterns of meaning-making. When all strands of evidence and interpretation are considered together, Göbekli Tepe emerges as a convergence point where biological survival, social cooperation, symbolic imagination, and spiritual longing fused into a single cultural phenomenon, demonstrating that the foundations of civilization were laid not only through practical adaptation, but through shared visions that redefined what it meant to live together. The people who built Göbekli Tepe inhabited a world of profound uncertainty, shaped by climatic fluctuations, ecological risks, and the fragility of life without agriculture or permanent shelter. Yet rather than responding solely with defensive strategies, they invested immense energy in constructing spaces that transcended immediate survival, suggesting that meaning itself functioned as a form of adaptation, enabling humans to face uncertainty with collective purpose rather than isolation and fear. From this perspective, ritual and belief were not irrational responses to ignorance, but sophisticated social tools that transformed anxiety into structure, chaos into narrative, and vulnerability into shared strength, allowing communities to endure and evolve. The monumental nature of Göbekli Tepe can thus be understood as an externalization of inner worlds, a physical manifestation of mental landscapes shaped by myth, memory, and imagination, where stone became a medium for encoding values, fears, and hopes in a form durable enough to outlast individual lives, anchoring identity across generations. This act of materializing meaning marks a crucial step in human cognitive evolution, because it allowed abstract concepts to be stabilized in the environment, creating feedback loops between thought, behavior, and space that reinforced shared understanding and coordinated action on an unprecedented scale. Psychologically, the experience of gathering at Göbekli Tepe likely fostered what modern scholars describe as collective effervescence, moments of heightened emotional unity in which individuals feel part of something larger than themselves, dissolving personal boundaries and reinforcing social bonds, a phenomenon that continues to underpin religious, political, and cultural movements throughout history. Such experiences would have been especially powerful in small-scale societies, where shared ritual could recalibrate relationships, resolve tensions, and reaffirm mutual obligations without formal institutions, illustrating how emotion and meaning functioned as regulatory forces long before codified laws or centralized authority. The ethical dimension of Göbekli Tepe is also worth considering, because while it predates explicit moral codes, the very act of cooperation required to build and maintain the site implies shared norms of reciprocity, trust, and responsibility, suggesting that morality itself may have emerged not primarily from rules, but from participation in collective practices that made cooperation emotionally rewarding and socially necessary. In this way, Göbekli Tepe contributes to ongoing debates about the origins of ethics, indicating that moral behavior may be rooted as much in ritualized belonging as in rational calculation or fear of punishment. The site's legacy also invites reflection on the relationship between humans and the environment, because Göbekli Tepe represents one of the earliest instances of humans deliberately reshaping a landscape for symbolic purposes, marking a transition from passive adaptation to active world-making, a process that would eventually culminate in agriculture, urbanization, and industrialization. Yet unlike later transformations driven by exploitation and efficiency, Göbekli Tepe's reshaping of the land appears guided by reverence rather than domination, raising important questions about alternative pathways of human-environment interaction grounded in respect, symbolism, and restraint. This contrast offers a powerful mirror for modern societies grappling with ecological crisis, reminding us that the impulse to shape the world has always been intertwined with values and beliefs, and that different cultural frameworks can lead to profoundly different outcomes. The global resonance of Göbekli Tepe in the modern imagination reflects a widespread yearning to reconnect with origins, to rediscover a time when meaning was collectively constructed and deeply embedded in place, perhaps as a response to contemporary fragmentation and dislocation, suggesting that ancient sites continue to function symbolically not only for those who built them, but for all who encounter them across time. In this sense, Göbekli Tepe has become a modern myth as well as an ancient one, a story through which humanity negotiates its understanding of progress, spirituality, and identity. The interdisciplinary dialogue sparked by Göbekli Tepe has also reshaped academic practice, encouraging collaboration between hard science and humanistic interpretation, and demonstrating that understanding the past requires not only data and method, but imagination, empathy, and philosophical openness, qualities that mirror those likely possessed by the site's original builders. As future excavations uncover new layers and new sites expand the known ritual landscape of the early Neolithic Göbekli Tepe will continue to serve as a reference point, a touchstone against which new discoveries are measured and new theories tested, ensuring its place at the center of discussions about human origins for generations to come. Part 8 thus affirms that the true significance of Göbekli Tepe lies not in any single interpretation, but in its capacity to transform how we think about humanity itself, revealing that from the very beginning, humans were not only toolmakers and foragers, but storytellers, builders of meaning, and architects of shared worlds. By recognizing this, we gain a deeper appreciation of continuity across time, understanding that the same impulses that drew people to Göbekli Tepe, to gather, to symbolize, to transcend isolation through shared experience, continue to shape modern societies in new forms. Ultimately, Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent yet powerful reminder that civilization began not simply when humans learned to control nature, but when they learned to come together around ideas larger than themselves, carving those ideas into stone so that they could endure, guide, and inspire. And in doing so, it invites us to ask not only where we come from, but what kinds of meanings we choose to build, preserve, and pass forward into the future. Part 9 of the Göbekli Tepe series approaches the subject from the perspective of transformation across deep time, examining how the symbolic revolution embodied at this ancient sanctuary gradually unfolded into the complex cultural worlds that followed. Because Göbekli Tepe represents not an endpoint, but a formative threshold where humanity's relationship with meaning, power, and continuity was irreversibly altered. As generations passed after the site's final burial, the social energies once concentrated on a single monumental hilltop did not disappear, but diffused outward into everyday life, shaping how early agricultural communities organized space, memory, and authority, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe's greatest influence lay not in imitation of its architecture, but in the internalization of its symbolic logic. The transition to farming brought profound changes to human existence, anchoring people to specific territories and rhythms of labor. Yet the need for shared narratives and sacred frameworks remained as strong as ever, and the lessons learned at ritual centers like Göbekli Tepe, how to coordinate large groups, how to legitimize leadership through symbolism, and how to bind individuals into moral communities, proved essential for sustaining increasingly dense and sedentary populations. Early villages across the Fertile Crescent began to incorporate communal buildings, shrines, and ritual spaces that echoed Göbekli Tepe's role as a focal point of collective identity, even as their scale diminished and their integration into domestic life increased, reflecting a shift from episodic pilgrimage to continuous ritual presence, where the sacred became woven into the fabric of daily existence rather than set apart on a distant hill. This shift marks a crucial transformation in religious experience, as belief moved from rare moments of intense communal gathering to ongoing practices embedded in household routines, seasonal festivals, and local landscapes, demonstrating the adaptability of the symbolic systems first externalized at Göbekli Tepe. Power, too, underwent a subtle reconfiguration during this period, because while Göbekli Tepe appears to have operated through charismatic and ritual authority rather than permanent hierarchy, the rise of agricultural surplus created new possibilities for inequality, inheritance, and institutional control, raising the question of whether the symbolic tools pioneered at early sanctuaries were later co-opted to legitimize more rigid social structures. Temples, priesthoods, and eventually kings would all rely on the same fundamental principle visible at Göbekli Tepe: the ability to translate abstract cosmological ideas into tangible forms that command loyalty, awe, and obedience, suggesting that the roots of political authority lie as much in ritual and belief as in force or economic control. Yet it would be a mistake to see this transformation as a simple story of loss or corruption, because the integration of sacred symbolism into emerging civilizations also enabled unprecedented forms of cooperation, creativity, and knowledge transmission, allowing societies to coordinate large-scale projects, preserve cultural memory, and articulate ethical systems that extended beyond kinship ties. The animal imagery that once dominated the pillars of Göbekli Tepe gradually gave way to anthropomorphic deities, mythic narratives, and symbolic systems tied to agriculture, fertility, and cosmic order, reflecting changes in how humans understood their relationship to nature, shifting from negotiation with wild forces to stewardship and control, while still retaining echoes of earlier animistic sensibilities. These echoes remind us that cultural evolution is rarely linear or total, as older layers of meaning persist beneath newer frameworks, shaping behavior and imagination in subtle ways. Göbekli Tepe thus functions as a deep cultural ancestor, a buried foundation upon which later religious traditions unknowingly built, influencing not specific myths, but the very structure of how humans conceive the sacred as something that can be located, represented, and collectively engaged. The endurance of pilgrimage, monumental architecture, and ritual calendars across civilizations testifies to the lasting power of this structure, suggesting that once humans learned to anchor meaning in place and performance, they rarely abandoned that strategy, even as its content changed. From a temporal perspective, Göbekli Tepe challenges modern notions of progress that equate advancement with technological complexity, because it reveals a moment when symbolic sophistication outpaced material development, reminding us that humanity's deepest innovations often occur in the realm of ideas rather than tools. This insight invites reconsideration of contemporary assumptions about the future, particularly the belief that technological advancement alone can sustain social cohesion, when Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that shared meaning and collective ritual are equally vital components of resilient societies. The long silence of Göbekli Tepe beneath the earth also carries symbolic weight, because its burial and rediscovery mirror the cycles of forgetting and remembering that shape cultural history, showing how foundational ideas can lie dormant for millennia before re-emerging to challenge and enrich modern understanding. The rediscovery of the site in the 20th century did more than add a chapter to prehistory. It disrupted deeply held narratives about human origins, revealing that the impulse to build sacred spaces predates economic necessity and political organization. And in doing so, it forced a re-examination of what truly motivates collective action. This re-examination continues to ripple outward, influencing not only archaeology but broader conversations about religion, psychology, and social theory. As scholars grapple with the implications of a past in which belief appears as a primary driver of change rather than a secondary reflection of material conditions. Göbekli Tepe also invites a more humble relationship with the past, reminding modern observers that ancient peoples were not simply precursors to civilization, but fully human beings navigating their world with intelligence, creativity, and emotional depth, capable of producing cultural achievements that still defy easy explanation. The continuity between their concerns and ours, about belonging, mortality, and meaning, underscores the shared humanity that links present and past across vast expanses of time. Part 9 thus frames Göbekli Tepe as a bridge rather than a relic, connecting the earliest expressions of collective spirituality to the complex cultural systems that followed, revealing a long arc of transformation in which belief, ritual, and symbolism continuously adapted to new social realities while retaining their core function of making life intelligible and communal. By tracing this arc, we come to see that civilization did not emerge suddenly with cities and writing, but gradually, through countless acts of shared imagination and cooperation, many of which found their first monumental expression at Göbekli Tepe. In recognizing this, we are invited to reflect on our own place within this ongoing story, understanding that the ways we create meaning today, through art, ritual, ideology, and shared spaces, are part of a lineage that stretches back to the first stones raised on a windswept hill in Anatolia, where humanity began to discover that by building together around shared symbols, it could transform not only its environment, but its understanding of itself and its future. Part 10 of the Göbekli Tepe series completes the exploration of this extraordinary sanctuary by considering its ultimate significance for understanding human history, cognition, and culture. Because Göbekli Tepe represents more than the oldest known monumental temple. It embodies the moment when humans began to externalize thought, belief, and memory on a scale that transformed societies, reshaping the trajectory of civilization itself, and offering profound insights into why humans build, gather, and create shared meaning even in the absence of writing, cities, or political hierarchy. The site's monumental T-shaped pillars, some towering over 5 meters and weighing tens of tons, signal an unprecedented level of cooperation and planning, demonstrating that early hunter-gatherer communities possessed both the organizational capacity and the conceptual sophistication to conceive and execute projects of immense symbolic and technical complexity, challenging traditional assumptions that monumental architecture required agricultural surplus or state-level authority. Each enclosure, circular or oval in form, functioned as a carefully orchestrated environment, where spatial arrangement, relief carvings, and pillar orientation worked together to create immersive experiences that guided perception and fostered communal engagement, suggesting that the builders understood not only stoneworking techniques, but also the psychological and social dynamics of large groups, recognizing how awe, repetition, and shared ritual could consolidate identity and reinforce cooperation. The anthropomorphic qualities of the pillars, marked by stylized arms and hands, but devoid of faces, indicate a sophisticated abstraction of the human form, possibly representing ancestral spirits, supernatural beings, or idealized human archetypes, while the abundance of animal motifs, lions, boars, snakes, birds, and scorpions, implies a complex symbolic system in which each species conveyed specific meanings related to cosmology, mortality, or social ethics, creating a narrative landscape that could be read by participants and integrated into collective memory. The use of feasting and communal consumption of hunted animals further highlights the integration of ritual, sustenance, and social cohesion, as these gatherings likely served both practical and symbolic functions, reinforcing alliances, redistributing resources, and marking cyclical or transformative events within the community, while also elevating shared experience into a sacred act, demonstrating that religion at Göbekli Tepe was lived and enacted rather than codified. The deliberate burial of the enclosures adds a layer of interpretive complexity, reflecting intentional closure rather than abandonment, suggesting that ritual spaces were conceived as temporal constructs with life cycles, and that endings were as meaningful as beginnings, an insight that resonates with later practices of temple renewal and sacred preservation found across human cultures, where closure functions to protect and sanctify rather than erase. Göbekli Tepe's placement atop a limestone hill overlooking the surrounding plains may also reflect an awareness of landscape as sacred medium, turning geography into symbolic architecture, where elevation, visibility, and prominence imbue a site with power, while access and approach guide social and psychological experience, reinforcing the idea that spatial cognition and environmental perception were integral to early religious practice. The cognitive implications of Göbekli Tepe are equally profound, as the coordination of labor, symbolic coherence, and multi-generational construction imply advanced abstract reasoning, long-term planning, and cultural transmission, revealing that complex thought, creativity, and memory systems were already fully developed in pre-agricultural societies, challenging linear models of cognitive evolution and suggesting that symbolic intelligence was not a byproduct of settled life, but a driving force in the transition from mobile foraging to complex communal existence. The social ramifications are equally striking, because participation in construction and ritual likely required negotiation, leadership, and shared norms, illustrating that the origins of social organization, moral frameworks, and collective identity are deeply entwined with symbolic practice, rather than emerging solely from economic or technological necessity, and reinforcing the notion that belief, ritual, and culture are primary agents in shaping human societies. As agriculture developed nearby, the principles pioneered at Göbekli Tepe, centralized sacred space, symbolic codification of meaning, ritualized gathering, and integration of memory into landscape, were adapted into village and eventually urban contexts, influencing the emergence of temples, communal structures, and organized religion throughout the Near East, demonstrating that the cognitive and social innovations encoded at the site reverberated far beyond its immediate temporal and geographic context. The global significance of Göbekli Tepe also lies in its ability to challenge and inspire, not only within academia, but in the wider human imagination, as it forces reconsideration of what humans are capable of without the technological and institutional frameworks often assumed to be prerequisites for civilization, highlighting that creativity, cooperation, and spirituality are not secondary byproducts of material culture, but fundamental drivers of human development. In addition, the continued mystery surrounding specific aspects of the site, ritual meaning, symbolic language, astronomical knowledge, and social structure, invites a sense of humility, reminding modern observers that the cognitive, emotional, and cultural worlds of our ancestors were complex, sophisticated, and deeply human, yet fundamentally different in expression, resisting easy categorization. In synthesis, Part 10 affirms that Göbekli Tepe represents a pivotal moment in human history, a threshold where imagination, ritual, and cooperation converge to produce enduring cultural architecture, and that its lessons resonate across time, revealing the centrality of shared meaning, collective experience, and symbolic engagement in the development of societies. The sanctuary teaches that civilization did not emerge solely from material necessity, but from the human desire to understand, commemorate, and transform existence, and that the impulse to gather, to carve, and to ritualize remains a defining feature of the human story. As modern archaeology continues to uncover its hidden enclosures and researchers refine interpretations, Göbekli Tepe will remain a testament to humanity's earliest aspirations, a site where the invisible forces of belief and imagination were rendered in stone, shaping not only the societies that followed, but our understanding of what it means to be human, standing as a timeless monument to the power of shared vision, enduring cooperation, and the creation of meaning that bridges the millennia. And in doing so, it challenges every generation to reflect on the ways we continue to build, gather, and find purpose together in the world we inhabit. Part 11 of the Göbekli Tepe series delves into the broader cultural, cognitive, and symbolic ramifications of this extraordinary site, examining how its existence reshapes our understanding of the origins of human society, the emergence of ritual consciousness, and the interplay between belief, cooperation, and material transformation, because Göbekli Tepe is more than an archaeological curiosity. It is a window into the first human attempts to externalize thought, to anchor shared meaning in physical form, and to create a space where social cohesion and cosmological imagination could coexist, revealing that long before agriculture, writing, or cities, humans were capable of collective action on a monumental scale, guided by symbolic intelligence and spiritual vision. The enclosures themselves, circular or oval and dominated by massive T-shaped pillars, were more than structural feats. They were cognitive tools, designed to shape perception, memory, and experience, with each pillar serving as both a physical and symbolic node within a complex network of relationships, where animals, abstract motifs, and anthropomorphic forms interacted to produce a visual language capable of encoding cosmological ideas, social roles, and moral narratives, allowing participants to engage in a shared understanding of the universe, and demonstrating that symbolic thinking was already highly sophisticated among pre-agricultural communities. The animal imagery carved into the stones, lions, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, and birds, suggests not mere representation of the natural world, but a complex mythopoetic system in which each creature conveyed qualities, powers, or lessons, and where the juxtaposition of species may have narrated stories of transformation, danger, and social ethics, functioning as mnemonic devices that structured oral knowledge and guided ritual behavior across generations. The human-like pillars, stylized with arms and hands, but often faceless, may represent ancestral spirits or conceptual archetypes, highlighting an early abstraction of identity, humanity, and spiritual authority, while the careful placement of enclosures in relation to one another suggests a sophisticated understanding of space as meaningful, creating a landscape in which movement, visibility, and approach were ritualized, transforming the simple act of entering a site into an embodied engagement with cosmology and social order. Feasting and communal gatherings at Göbekli Tepe amplified these effects, integrating nourishment, cooperation, and performance into experiences that reinforced trust, hierarchy, and social cohesion, while the episodic nature of these events suggests that ritual intensity rather than frequency was key, allowing small hunter-gatherer groups to periodically transcend everyday existence, reaffirm their bonds, and collectively negotiate meaning, demonstrating that culture and spirituality are primary adaptive strategies rather than secondary embellishments of material survival. The deliberate burial of the enclosures around 8200 BCE adds further layers of interpretation, implying a conscious management of sacred space, and suggesting that closure, memory, and transformation were integral to the spiritual practice itself, reflecting an understanding that the life cycle of ritual constructions mirrors the cycles of human existence, and that endings are as important as beginnings in maintaining cosmological and social balance. Göbekli Tepe's temporal and symbolic dimensions are inseparable from its physical construction, because building, carving, and arranging stones was itself a performative act, embedding knowledge, belief, and social norms into the landscape, creating a durable record of collective cognition that could guide future generations even in the absence of writing. The cognitive implications extend beyond ritual, indicating that early humans possessed advanced capacities for abstraction, planning, coordination, and social intelligence, capable of conceptualizing tasks that would span decades, negotiating labor and meaning across multiple lifetimes, and maintaining shared symbolic frameworks, demonstrating that the roots of culture and complex social behavior predate agriculture rather than emerging from it. From a broader evolutionary perspective, Göbekli Tepe suggests that the creation of sacred space may have been a driving force in the development of human cooperation, providing a mechanism for organizing labor, resolving conflict, and transmitting knowledge, reinforcing the idea that religion and ritual are not mere byproducts of civilization, but active shapers of social complexity. The influence of Göbekli Tepe extends far beyond its own time and place, as the principles evident at the site: centralized sacred architecture, symbolic codification, ritualized communal gathering, and integration of landscape, memory, and cosmology, can be seen echoed in later Neolithic and Chalcolithic sites throughout the Near East, where communal buildings, shrines, and temples perpetuate the cognitive and social logic first externalized on this Anatolian hilltop, demonstrating continuity of symbolic practice even as content, scale, and technology evolved. The rediscovery of Göbekli Tepe in modern archaeology has amplified its significance, challenging linear models of social evolution that place economic subsistence and political authority before symbolic innovation, and instead emphasizing that collective imagination, ritual, and belief were foundational to human societies, capable of mobilizing resources, structuring social life, and transmitting knowledge across generations, thereby reframing the narrative of civilization to foreground the primacy of culture and cognition alongside material development. This perspective has implications for contemporary understanding of human nature, suggesting that the impulses that motivated the builders of Göbekli Tepe, creativity, cooperation, symbolic thought, and spiritual exploration, remain central to social cohesion and cultural continuity today, highlighting that meaning-making is not an optional embellishment, but a core driver of human behavior. The ongoing mysteries of the site, the precise meanings of symbols, the specific rituals performed, and the role of leadership or social hierarchy underscore the limits of archaeological inference and invite humility in our interpretations, as well as the recognition that ambiguity itself may have been part of the site's original power, fostering awe, reflection, and a sense of engagement with the unknown. The temporal depth, architectural sophistication, and symbolic complexity of Göbekli Tepe position it not only as the world's earliest known temple, but as a touchstone for understanding the emergence of human consciousness, sociality, and imagination, revealing that monumental creativity and spiritual inquiry predate agriculture, writing, and urbanization, and that these capacities are foundational to the trajectory of human history. Ultimately, Part 11 emphasizes that Göbekli Tepe is a story of humans discovering how to externalize thought, anchor shared meaning, and transform both landscape and society through collective ritual, providing insight into the deep roots of civilization while illuminating the enduring human quest for connection, purpose, and transcendence. And in doing so, it challenges us to reconsider the ways in which belief, creativity, and cooperation continue to shape our world, reminding us that from the very beginning, humans built not only structures but shared worlds, and that those worlds, carved into stone, continue to speak across 12,000 years, inspiring reflection on the past, present, and the possibilities of human imagination into the future. Part 13 of the Göbekli Tepe series expands the narrative to consider the broader implications of the site for understanding human culture, spirituality, and social evolution. Because Göbekli Tepe is not simply the earliest monumental temple, but a window into the cognitive, emotional, and cooperative capacities that define humanity, revealing how symbolic thought, ritual, and communal action coalesced to produce structures that transcended immediate survival needs and reshaped the very trajectory of civilization. The monumental T-shaped pillars, carved from local limestone and sometimes towering over 5 meters in height, demonstrate an unprecedented combination of technical skill, logistical coordination, and symbolic sophistication, indicating that pre-agricultural societies were capable of abstract thought, planning across generations, and cooperative labor at a scale previously thought impossible, challenging the notion that monumentality and organized ritual arose only after sedentism. Surplus economies, or hierarchical governance. Each enclosure, circular or oval in layout, functions as a carefully orchestrated environment in which the placement, orientation, and visual interplay of pillars create a multisensory experience designed to shape perception, guide movement, and encode collective meaning, reflecting an understanding that architecture can serve not only functional or defensive purposes, but also cognitive and spiritual ones, mediating relationships between individuals, community, and cosmos. The carvings themselves, ranging from stylized human forms, marked with arms and hands but often faceless, to animals including lions, foxes, boars, snakes, and birds, constitute a symbolic language through which cosmological narratives, social norms, and moral lessons were communicated and memorized, suggesting that pre-literate humans had already developed sophisticated semiotic systems capable of encoding and transmitting complex cultural knowledge across time, allowing dispersed groups to maintain cohesion through shared understanding. The integration of communal feasting, labor, and ritual performance further demonstrates that social, symbolic, and practical dimensions were inseparable. With participation in construction and ceremony reinforcing alliances, redistributing resources, and embedding collective memory in both bodies and landscape, revealing that ritual was not a secondary embellishment, but a primary mechanism for social organization, knowledge transmission, and cognitive development. The deliberate burial of the enclosures around 80–200 BCE adds another layer of interpretive depth, implying an awareness of temporality, transformation, and ritual closure, where the act of interment served to preserve spiritual potency, mark the completion of cycles, and maintain cultural memory, illustrating that early humans conceived of sacred space as dynamic, cyclical, and infused with both social and cosmological significance. From a cognitive standpoint, Göbekli Tepe demonstrates advanced capacities for abstract reasoning, long-term planning, and symbolic thought. As evidenced by the consistency of motifs, coordination of labor, and technical precision of stone working, indicating that intellectual sophistication preceded sedentism, agriculture, and formalized political structures, and suggesting that symbolic intelligence and cooperative ritual were foundational drivers of social complexity rather than mere byproducts. This insight reshapes models of human evolution, emphasizing that the ability to imagine, symbolize, and collectively act was central to adaptation and survival, and that the roots of morality, social norms, and leadership lie in shared symbolic experience rather than coercion or written law. The site also illuminates the origins of religious practice, showing that early spiritual systems emerged as embodied, performative, and communal phenomena, grounded in ritual, material culture, and environmental engagement, rather than in codified texts, demonstrating that belief is fundamentally social and cognitive, designed to coordinate behavior, transmit knowledge, and mediate human experience of uncertainty, mortality, and environmental variability. The principles first enacted at Göbekli Tepe, anchoring meaning in place, codifying cosmology through material culture, coordinating cooperative labor, and embedding collective memory, echo throughout the Neolithic and Chalcolithic Near East, where communal buildings, shrines, and temples continued to structure village life, suggesting continuity of symbolic logic even as societal scale, subsistence strategies, and governance evolved, and highlighting the deep temporal roots of architecture, ritual, and religious practice. Göbekli Tepe's rediscovery has also transformed modern understanding of prehistory, challenging linear narratives of technological and social development, and emphasizing the primacy of cognition, cooperation, and ritual innovation, reminding us that humans were capable of monumental creativity and abstract reasoning long before writing, metallurgy, or urbanization, and demonstrating that symbolic practice can be a primary agent of societal transformation. The philosophical implications are profound, highlighting that humans have always been driven by the need to create shared meaning, to externalize thought, and to engage collectively with forces perceived as larger than themselves, whether cosmological, social, or existential, revealing that the very act of building, gathering, and ritualizing is inseparable from human identity and cultural evolution. The site's location atop a limestone hill, visible across the surrounding plains, demonstrates an acute awareness of landscape as symbolic medium, where elevation, orientation, and spatial organization guide experience, mediate perception, and reinforce collective engagement, showing that early humans understood the psychological and social power of spatial design, and that landscape itself can function as a cognitive and spiritual canvas. The enduring mysteries of Göbekli Tepe, including the precise rituals performed, the meanings of abstract symbols, and the social organization underlying construction, underscore both the limits of archaeological inference and the capacity of the site to provoke awe, reflection, and reinterpretation, suggesting that ambiguity itself may have been functional, cultivating reverence, attention, and social cohesion among participants. From a broader temporal perspective, Göbekli Tepe illustrates the long arc of human cultural development, demonstrating that civilization emerges not solely from material necessity, but from imagination, cooperation, and the capacity to encode abstract thought into durable form, and that these early expressions of monumental creativity, social coordination, and symbolic reasoning laid the foundation for later religious, social, and political institutions. Part 13 thus frames Göbekli Tepe as a pivotal threshold in human history, where the earliest forms of collective cognition, ritual practice, and symbolic representation converged to create a shared space of meaning, demonstrating that the human impulse to gather, to create, and to externalize thought is fundamental, enduring, and transformative, and reminding us that the same capacities that shaped the monumental enclosures of Anatolia 12 millennia ago continue to shape culture, belief, and cooperation today, offering profound insight into both the origins and ongoing trajectory of human civilization. Part 14 of the Göbekli Tepe series delves deeper into the philosophical, societal, and existential implications of the site, examining how this extraordinary sanctuary illuminates not only the origins of ritual and monumental architecture, but also the very nature of human cognition, cooperation, and the creation of shared meaning. Because Göbekli Tepe represents a threshold where humanity first externalized thought and belief into enduring physical form, forging spaces that embodied collective imagination, codified cosmology, and coordinated action in ways that reshaped the trajectory of social evolution. The monumental T-shaped pillars, some weighing tens of tons and carved with both stylized human features and complex animal motifs, reflect advanced abstraction, demonstrating that pre-agricultural societies were capable of conceptual reasoning, symbolic thinking, and intergenerational planning, challenging the conventional narrative that monumental construction and ritual sophistication depended on settled life, surplus production, or centralized authority, and suggesting, instead, that symbolic intelligence and shared imagination were foundational drivers of human social complexity. The enclosures themselves, arranged in circular or oval patterns, functioned as immersive environments in which spatial design, visual symbolism, and material presence interacted to structure perception, social behavior, and cognitive engagement, indicating an understanding of the ways in which environment, ritual performance, and collective attention can be orchestrated to produce cohesion, awe, and shared experience, and revealing that architecture at Göbekli Tepe was simultaneously functional, symbolic, and psychological. The anthropomorphic pillars, faceless yet marked with arms and hands, may represent ancestral spirits, archetypal humans, or supernatural beings, while the dense animal imagery, including lions, boars, snakes, foxes, vultures, and birds, creates a complex semiotic system capable of encoding cosmological concepts, social norms, and moral narratives, functioning as a mnemonic framework through which knowledge, belief, and social memory could be transmitted across generations, allowing dispersed groups to maintain cohesion and shared understanding in the absence of written language. Communal feasting and ritualized labor at the site further demonstrate that social, symbolic, and practical dimensions were inseparable, with participation reinforcing alliances, redistributing resources, and embedding collective knowledge in both physical environment and embodied experience, illustrating that ritual acted as both a cognitive and social scaffold, regulating behavior, consolidating identity, and facilitating cooperation at a scale that would later underpin more complex societies. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures around 8200 BCE adds another dimension of meaning, reflecting an awareness of temporal cycles, ritual closure, and symbolic transformation, suggesting that the act of interment was intended to preserve spiritual potency, mark the conclusion of ceremonial phases, and maintain the continuity of cultural memory, emphasizing that sacred spaces were conceived as dynamic, cyclical, and integrated with broader social and cosmological frameworks. From a cognitive perspective, the site reveals that early humans possessed advanced capacities for abstraction, planning, symbolic reasoning, and coordination, as evidenced by the precision of pillar carving, the consistency of motifs, and the logistical achievement of moving and erecting massive stones without wheeled vehicles or draft animals, demonstrating that intellectual sophistication preceded agriculture, permanent settlement, and formalized political structures. and challenging linear models of cultural evolution that place symbolic innovation after economic or technological complexity. The implications for understanding the origins of religion are profound, indicating that spiritual systems emerged first as performative, communal, and embodied practices rooted in ritual, material culture, and environmental engagement, rather than as codified doctrine or institutional authority, and highlighting that belief functions primarily to coordinate social interaction, transmit knowledge, and mediate human engagement with uncertainty, mortality, and environmental risk. Göbekli Tepe's principles, anchoring meaning in physical space, codifying cosmology through durable material forms, and coordinating collective action through shared ritual, echo throughout subsequent Neolithic and Chalcolithic sites, where temples, shrines, and communal buildings perpetuate the same symbolic logic, demonstrating continuity of cultural strategy even as subsistence, settlement, and political organization evolved. Philosophically, Göbekli Tepe invites reflection on human creativity, aspiration, and the desire to engage with forces perceived as greater than oneself, revealing that the act of constructing shared symbolic spaces is as fundamental to human survival and adaptation as practical skills or resource acquisition, and that meaning-making is an intrinsic part of what it means to be human. The site's elevated placement and careful integration with the surrounding landscape demonstrate an awareness of geography as a medium for symbolic and social engagement, with visibility, approach, and orientation enhancing psychological impact and social coordination, reflecting a deep understanding of the interplay between cognition, perception, and environment. The enduring mysteries of Göbekli Tepe, including the specific rituals performed, the meanings of abstract symbols, and the social hierarchies involved in construction, underscore both the limits of archaeological inference and the capacity of ancient sites to inspire reflection, suggesting that ambiguity itself may have been functional in cultivating reverence, attention, and collective engagement. The rediscovery of Göbekli Tepe in modern times has reshaped understanding of prehistory, demonstrating that monumental creativity, abstract reasoning, and collective organization predate agriculture and urbanization, emphasizing the primacy of symbolic cognition and social imagination as drivers of human cultural evolution. From a temporal perspective, the site illustrates the long arc of human development, showing that civilization emerged not only from material necessity, but from the capacity to externalize thought, anchor shared meaning in durable form, and create structures that facilitated cooperation, memory, and identity across generations. Part 14 situates Göbekli Tepe as a threshold in human history, where cognitive, social, and spiritual innovations converged, producing a space of enduring significance that illuminates the deep roots of ritual, cooperation, and symbolic thought, and reminding us that the impulses to build, gather, and create shared meaning are timeless, central to human nature, and as relevant today as they were 12,000 years ago. Offering a profound lens through which to reflect on the origins of culture, the continuity of human aspiration, and the ongoing capacity for imagination, collaboration, and the creation of enduring collective worlds. Part 15 of the Göbekli Tepe series concludes this comprehensive exploration by synthesizing the archaeological, cultural, cognitive, and philosophical dimensions of the site, offering a deep reflection on what it reveals about humanity, its origins, and the enduring impulses that have shaped civilization. Because Göbekli Tepe is not merely the world's oldest known temple, but a profound testament to the capacity of early humans to imagine, cooperate, and create meaning on a scale that transcended immediate survival needs, demonstrating that symbolic intelligence, ritual practice, and collective action were foundational elements of social complexity long before agriculture, writing, or hierarchical governance. The monumental T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 10 tons and carved with both abstract and figurative imagery, reveal advanced skills in lithic engineering, spatial cognition, and symbolic representation, suggesting that the builders possessed not only technical expertise, but also a sophisticated understanding of how material form could encode ideas, cosmology, social values, and communal identity, transforming the act of construction into both a practical and a metaphysical undertaking. The enclosures themselves, circular or oval in design, functioned as immersive environments where the arrangement, scale, and orientation of pillars orchestrated movement, perception, and social interaction, creating a controlled spatial and cognitive experience that reinforced cohesion, awe, and shared understanding, indicating that the builders were fully aware of the psychological and social power of architecture and landscape, and that human experience could be shaped deliberately through the design of sacred space. The carvings of animals, lions, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, birds, and other creatures, alongside anthropomorphic forms with stylized arms and hands, comprise a symbolic language that conveyed cosmological principles, moral narratives, social norms, and mnemonic cues, allowing complex knowledge to be transmitted and preserved across generations in the absence of writing, and demonstrating that pre-literate humans possessed a level of abstract reasoning and semiotic sophistication that rivals later civilizations. Communal feasting, labor, and ritual activity at the site illustrate the inseparability of social, symbolic, and material systems, as participants collectively enacted cosmology, reinforced alliances, redistributed resources, and encoded memory both in the environment and within embodied experience, showing that ritual itself functioned as a primary mechanism for coordination, social cohesion, and the transmission of knowledge, rather than being merely a decorative or secondary aspect of society. The intentional burial of the enclosures approximately 12,000 years ago further emphasizes the site's complex understanding of temporality, transformation, and the sacred, suggesting that closure and interment were deliberate acts designed to preserve spiritual potency, mark the conclusion of ritual cycles, and maintain the continuity of cultural memory, reflecting an early recognition that the life of a sacred space is both temporal and symbolic, and that endings are as meaningful as beginnings. Cognitively, Göbekli Tepe provides evidence for advanced abstract thought, long-term planning, coordination, and symbolic reasoning, as seen in the precision of pillar carving, consistency of motifs, and logistical achievement of moving massive stones without wheels or draft animals, demonstrating that human intellectual sophistication preceded agriculture, permanent settlement, and formalized political structures, and challenging linear models that place symbolic innovation after economic or technological development. The implications for understanding the origins of religion are equally significant, as the site shows that spiritual systems emerge first as embodied, communal, and performative practices, deeply rooted in material culture, ritualized experience, and environmental engagement, rather than as codified texts or institutional authority, emphasizing that belief functions to coordinate social life, transmit knowledge, and mediate human engagement with uncertainty, mortality. In the natural world, Göbekli Tepe's enduring influence is evident in later Neolithic and Chalcolithic traditions, where the principles of monumental architecture, symbolic codification, communal ritual, and landscape integration were adapted to new contexts, demonstrating continuity of cognitive and social strategies even as economic, subsistence, and governance structures evolved, and highlighting the site's role as a cognitive and cultural ancestor to subsequent civilizations. Philosophically, Göbekli Tepe invites reflection on the human drive to create, imagine, and transcend, revealing that the impulses to externalize thought, construct shared spaces, and encode meaning are foundational to the human condition, and that these capacities have enabled the emergence of civilization, culture, and collective identity across time. The site's strategic placement atop a limestone hill, with careful attention to visibility, orientation, and spatial experience, underscores an early awareness of landscape as symbolic medium, where environment, cognition, and social practice intersect, revealing that humans have long understood how space can shape perception, behavior, and social cohesion. The persistent mysteries of Göbekli Tepe, the precise meanings of its symbols, the exact nature of its rituals, and the social structures behind its construction, highlight both the limits of archaeological interpretation and the enduring capacity of ancient sites to inspire reflection, contemplation, and reinterpretation, suggesting that ambiguity itself may have been a deliberate feature, cultivating awe, reverence, and communal focus among participants. In the modern era, the rediscovery and ongoing study of Göbekli Tepe have transformed perceptions of prehistory, challenging assumptions about the sequence of technological, social, and cognitive development, demonstrating that symbolic creativity, cooperative labor, and ritual sophistication predate agriculture and urbanization, and emphasizing that imagination and social intelligence are as central to human evolution as material innovation. Part 15 situates Göbekli Tepe as a threshold in human history, where cognitive, social, and spiritual capacities converged, producing a site of extraordinary complexity and enduring significance, revealing that civilization arose not only from material necessity, but from the capacity to externalize thought, create shared meaning, and coordinate collective action, and that the impulses to build, gather, and ritualize are timeless features of human nature. By tracing these threads, Göbekli Tepe emerges as both a historical and philosophical touchstone, illustrating the deep roots of social cohesion, symbolic cognition, and spiritual aspiration, and reminding us that the same capacities that shaped the monumental enclosures of Anatolia 12 millennia ago continue to shape human experience, culture, and imagination today, offering insight into the origins of meaning, cooperation, and the enduring human pursuit of transcendence, connection, and understanding across the vast expanse of time. Part 16 of the Göbekli Tepe series extends the narrative by examining the profound intersections of ritual, cognition, and social organization evident at the site, emphasizing how it reshapes our understanding of early human society and why it remains central to debates about the origins of civilization, because Göbekli Tepe is more than the earliest monumental temple. It is a physical manifestation of human imagination, cooperative capacity, and symbolic reasoning, demonstrating that pre-agricultural communities could conceive, coordinate, and execute projects that required advanced planning, abstract thought, and sustained social cohesion over multiple generations, thereby challenging conventional narratives that monumental architecture and organized religion emerged only after sedentism, surplus production, or hierarchical governance. The site's massive T-shaped pillars, carefully quarried, carved, and erected, reflect technical sophistication and a sophisticated grasp of material properties, logistics, and structural design, while their intricate animal motifs, depicting lions, foxes, boars, snakes, birds, scorpions, and vultures, function as a semiotic system, conveying cosmological concepts, moral narratives, social norms, and mnemonic structures that facilitated intergenerational transmission of knowledge in the absence of writing, illustrating that symbolic intelligence and abstract cognition were already fully developed among hunter-gatherer communities. The faceless anthropomorphic pillars, often marked only with arms, hands, or minimal anthropic indicators, suggest an early conceptualization of humanity, ancestry, or divine presence in abstract form, creating a flexible symbolic framework that could be interpreted communally while encoding social, cosmological, and ethical knowledge, and demonstrating that abstraction, imagination, and the social management of meaning were central to early human culture. The organization of enclosures in circular or oval layouts, with careful attention to spatial relationships, approach, and visibility, indicates a sophisticated understanding of space as both functional and symbolic, showing that movement, perspective, and spatial perception were deliberately orchestrated to produce collective experience, reinforce social cohesion, and structure ritual engagement, and underscoring that human cognition was inseparable from environmental and architectural manipulation, with material form serving as a cognitive and social tool. Communal feasting and coordinated labor at the site further exemplify the integration of ritual, sustenance, and social negotiation, as participation reinforced alliances, redistributed resources, and embedded cultural memory into both the landscape and the embodied experience of participants, revealing that ritual acted not only as spiritual expression, but as a practical mechanism for social organization, cooperation, and cultural continuity, enabling groups to manage complexity and sustain cohesion over time. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures around 8200 BCE adds another layer of interpretive depth, indicating that temporal cycles, closure, and transformation were central to ritual practice, and suggesting that the act of interment served both to preserve spiritual potency and to signal the completion of social and cosmological cycles, reflecting an early understanding that sacred spaces are not static but dynamic, temporal, and deeply integrated into the social and natural rhythms of human life. Cognitively, the site evidences advanced capacities for abstraction, symbolic reasoning, and long-term planning, as seen in the consistency of motifs, logistical coordination of massive stones without wheeled vehicles, and precise execution of construction and carving, demonstrating that intellectual sophistication and cooperative organization preceded agriculture, settlement, and hierarchical authority, and challenging linear models of social evolution that assume material complexity drives symbolic innovation rather than the reverse. The implications for the origins of religion are significant, as Göbekli Tepe suggests that spiritual systems first emerged as communal, performative, and material practices, rather than as codified doctrine, illustrating that belief functions primarily to coordinate social behavior, transmit knowledge, and mediate human engagement with uncertainty, mortality, and environmental risk. Highlighting that ritual and symbolic thought were adaptive strategies central to survival and cultural evolution. The principles first realized at Göbekli Tepe, anchoring meaning in place, codifying cosmology in durable material form, coordinating collective labor, and embedding knowledge in landscape, echo throughout subsequent Neolithic and Chalcolithic traditions, where temples, shrines, and communal architecture perpetuate the cognitive and social logic established by these early builders, demonstrating continuity of symbolic practice and communal strategy even as subsistence, settlement, and governance systems evolved. Philosophically, the site invites reflection on the human desire to externalize thought, create shared meaning, and engage collectively with forces perceived as greater than oneself, revealing that creativity, cooperation, and ritualized engagement are fundamental to the human condition, driving both social cohesion and cultural innovation, and suggesting that civilization emerges as much from imagination and collective belief as from material or technological achievement. The placement of Göbekli Tepe atop a prominent hill, with attention to approach, orientation, and visibility, demonstrates an early awareness of landscape as a medium for social, cognitive, and symbolic engagement, showing that humans understood how environmental design could guide perception, structure social interaction, and amplify collective experience, reflecting a deep entanglement of cognition, environment, and ritual. The enduring enigmas of Göbekli Tepe, including the precise meaning of its animal and anthropomorphic symbols, the nature of its ceremonies, and the social structures supporting construction, underscore the limits of modern interpretation while highlighting the capacity of ancient sites to provoke reflection, contemplation, and reinterpretation, and suggesting that deliberate ambiguity may have enhanced ritual potency, fostered awe, and reinforced communal focus. Rediscovery of the site has transformed understanding of prehistory, emphasizing that monumental creativity, symbolic cognition, and cooperative organization predate agriculture and urbanization, reshaping narratives of human evolution to foreground imagination, social intelligence, and ritual innovation as primary drivers of civilization, and illustrating that the human capacity to externalize thought and meaning is both ancient and foundational. Part 16 situates Göbekli Tepe as a threshold where cognition, ritual, and sociality converged, producing enduring structures that encoded collective knowledge, cosmology, and ethical frameworks, revealing that human culture arose not solely from material necessity, but from the capacity to create shared worlds through imagination, cooperation, and symbolic engagement, and reminding us that the same impulses that shaped these monumental enclosures 12,000 years ago, creativity, collaboration, and the desire to transcend immediate survival, continue to define human societies, culture, and thought today, offering profound insight into the origins of meaning, social cohesion, and the enduring human pursuit of connection, understanding, and transcendence across time. Part 17 of the Göbekli Tepe series explores the profound cognitive, social, and symbolic dimensions of the site, reflecting on how it illuminates the emergence of complex human thought, ritual, and community organization. Because Göbekli Tepe is not merely an archaeological site, but a transformative lens through which we can understand the ways in which early humans externalized imagination, codified shared meaning, and coordinated collective action in ways that shaped the trajectory of civilization, demonstrating that monumental construction, symbolic abstraction, and ritualized cooperation were already fully present in pre-agricultural societies. Monumental T-shaped pillars, quarried from local limestone and intricately carved with both anthropomorphic and zoomorphic motifs, reflect technical expertise, advanced planning, and spatial reasoning, indicating that the builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of material properties, transportation logistics, and structural stability, while simultaneously embedding social, cosmological, and ethical meaning into the stones, showing that construction was inseparable from cognition, symbolism, and community identity, and revealing a remarkable integration of functional and metaphysical purpose in early human architecture. The anthropomorphic pillars, faceless but marked with stylized arms and hands, suggest early conceptions of the human form as a vessel for ancestral, spiritual, or archetypal presence, while the rich array of animal imagery, including lions, foxes, boars, snakes, vultures, birds, and scorpions, constitutes a complex symbolic system capable of encoding cosmology, social norms, and mnemonic narratives, functioning as a visual language that structured knowledge transmission, ritual practice, and communal memory across generations, and highlighting the capacity for abstraction and semiotic sophistication in pre-literate societies. The circular and oval enclosures were carefully designed spatial environments where movement, perspective, and visibility were orchestrated to shape perception, social interaction, and ritual experience, demonstrating an early understanding of the psychological and social effects of architecture and landscape, and indicating that human cognition, social cohesion, and symbolic engagement were mutually reinforcing, with built space serving as both medium and message for collective understanding. Communal feasting, coordinated labor, and ritualized performance at Göbekli Tepe further exemplify the inseparability of practical and symbolic action, as participation reinforced alliances, redistributed resources, and embedded shared knowledge into both landscape and embodied experience, showing that ritual was a primary mechanism for social organization, cooperation, and memory, facilitating cohesion and identity, even in relatively small and mobile hunter-gatherer communities. The intentional burial of the enclosures around 8200 BCE adds an additional layer of interpretive significance, suggesting a sophisticated awareness of temporality, transformation, and ritual closure, where interment preserved spiritual potency, marked the completion of ceremonial cycles, and maintained cultural memory, reflecting an early recognition that sacred space is dynamic and temporal, and that endings are as meaningful as beginnings in the social and cosmological order. Cognitively, Göbekli Tepe provides evidence of advanced abstraction, long-term planning, coordination, and symbolic reasoning, as seen in the consistency of motifs, precision of stone carving, and logistical management of moving and erecting massive pillars without wheeled vehicles or draft animals, demonstrating that intellectual sophistication and social organization preceded agriculture, permanent settlement, and formalized authority, challenging linear models of social evolution and reframing the origins of civilization around cognition, imagination, and cooperation. The implications for understanding religion are profound, as the site suggests that spiritual systems originated as performative, communal, and material practices rooted in ritual, architecture, and environmental engagement, rather than codified doctrine, illustrating that belief functions primarily to coordinate social life, transmit knowledge, and mediate engagement with uncertainty, mortality, and environmental challenges. Emphasizing that ritual and symbolic thought were adaptive strategies, central to survival and cultural continuity. The principles embodied at Göbekli Tepe, anchoring meaning in space, encoding cosmology in durable material form, coordinating cooperative labor, and embedding collective knowledge, resonate through subsequent Neolithic and Chalcolithic traditions, where temples, shrines, and communal structures perpetuated the same cognitive and social logic, demonstrating the continuity of symbolic practice across temporal and geographic scales, even as societies transition to agriculture, permanent settlements, and hierarchical governance. Philosophically, the site invites reflection on the human drive to externalize thought, create shared meaning, and engage collectively with forces greater than oneself, revealing that creativity, cooperation, and ritualized engagement are fundamental to human nature and central to the emergence of civilization, showing that monumental architecture is as much a product of imagination and social cohesion as it is of technology or economic surplus. The elevated placement of Göbekli Tepe and its integration with the surrounding landscape reveal an early appreciation of geography as a medium for symbolic, social, and cognitive engagement, where visibility, approach, and spatial relationships were used to shape perception, social interaction, and communal experience, demonstrating that humans have long understood the power of environment to structure thought and collective identity. The site's enduring mysteries, including the specific meaning of symbols, the nature of rituals, and the social hierarchies underlying construction, highlight both the limits of modern interpretation and the capacity of ancient sites to provoke reflection, suggesting that ambiguity itself may have served a functional role in cultivating awe, attention, and social cohesion. The modern rediscovery and study of Göbekli Tepe has profoundly reshaped our understanding of prehistory, challenging assumptions about linear progression in social and cognitive development, emphasizing that symbolic creativity, abstract reasoning, and cooperative organization are primary drivers of civilization, and demonstrating that the human capacity to externalize thought and meaning has deep roots extending well before the development of agriculture and urbanization. Part 17 situates Göbekli Tepe as a threshold where cognition, ritual, and sociality converge, producing enduring structures that encode collective knowledge, cosmology, and ethical frameworks, showing that civilization arises not only from material necessity, but from the ability to create shared meaning, and reminding us that the same impulses, creativity, cooperation, and the desire to transcend immediate survival, that shaped these monumental enclosures 12 millennia ago continue to define human societies, offering profound insight into the origins of culture, cooperation, and the enduring human pursuit of connection, understanding, and transcendence across time, and highlighting Göbekli Tepe as both a historical and philosophical touchstone for the study of humanity itself.